Welcome. My name is Daniel Sueta. I'm Mi Gente's political director. Last Thursday, the Biden administration released its prosecutorial discretion memorandum, or what we think of as instructions and guidance to ICE agents. And so today, we're going to be tackling what this means for our immigrant community, the good, the bad, the ambiguous, and talk to you about where we see opportunities for organizing, opportunities for pushing back on the Biden administration, and hear what people on the ground are saying, folks who are actively fighting deportation cases, and who are going to be impacted by these policies that we've been fighting for so long. Um, on that note, this has been actually a pretty long fight for Mi Gente and for the many organizations who've worked to end deportations and to reduce deportations over the years, from the Education Not Deportation campaign to the Not One More campaign back under Obama, like 10 years ago. Because prosecutorial discretion, basically what ICE agents can or can't do within immigration enforcement, shapes every arrest, every detention, every deportation decision that ICE makes. And for us, it's been a tool that we have used to anchor our arguments against deportations, particularly under Obama in the past and now under Biden, in areas where there is room to push and to redefine. So that's why, when the Biden administration first came to power, we immediately focused on this set of policies that would guide how deportations were going to happen under Biden. You may remember the Eyes on ICE Truth and Accountability Forums exposing how immigration was impacting our communities. It was precisely thinking about impacting the prosecutorial discretion memo. So now we have a new memo. It goes into the effect on November 29th. And that's why we're here today, talking about these perspectives from organizers on the ground, from legal folks, from people who have been in the past considered priority for deportation, to just give you a little bit of a taste about what the PD memo says and how we're thinking about it as an organizing tool. And so with that, I want to bring in our first speaker. I want to introduce you to Adelina Nichols. Adelina is the director at the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. It's an organization in Georgia that's long been fighting deportations from the Not One More campaign and maybe even before that. But Adelina, as someone who's been in this fight for decades at this point, as I said, you were part of the Not One More deportation campaign. What opportunities does this memo represent for you and for our community?
I think to start with this, Tanya, we do believe that this new memo provides a moment of opportunity, a political fight, but also it is important to recognize that we have never seen a memorandum to this extent, so open, so clear, so willing as well to apply procedural discretion to different community members. And for us, this is a win that in many cases has been an achievement from all of us, of Mi Gente and all those organizers and activists that have been on the ground fighting deportations, detentions, or arrests. No doubt that we know that road. The road of fighting deportations, looking into procedural discretion, that's something that we do know how to do. Even no, we were kind of wondering what is coming next, and for those that do not know the history of Mi Gente with No One More, but opens the opportunity that we do know how to walk this road. I think that at the same time give us the chance to move in another direction, seeking another more cover to other communities, like for example, the community at the border. No, what is going on at the border that nobody wants to talk about. And I think that with one hand, we fight the prosecutorial discretion, but at the same time, we push for other demands that will cover more individuals which are in detention or are about to cross the border. But this is a long history, but never I have seen a memorandum in 20 years doing the grassroots community organizing that very clear opens the opportunity for many others. The concern in many communities is that in the past years, we had cases that people had a DUI from 20 years ago, or domestic violence of 20 years ago, and now is arrested by the police, processed for deportation, and then is deported because of that. Now is the opportunity for many of our community members that remain and that join the struggle, which you are now, because still, even when we have been fighting for more than 20 years, I think that if we still have a big road to walk, which is it is important for everybody as well to know the history. Prosecutorial discretion helps, and helps a lot, and helps more when we fight it together. It's not another option, because sometimes it's very difficult to control the decisions made by the ICE officers or field officers. I think that we need to fight it. We do know how to do it, but now we need people to understand that that help us in this fight, and to continue with us working, fighting for a relief for all the 11 million undocumented persons that are out there, that have been here for 25, 30 years ago. So I think it's time to move and take the opportunity and put all the good intention, politics, mobilizations, our organizing, our troops as well, everybody on board, to look for some kind of relief as well, to reconciliate the reconciliation bill as well. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Tanya, but what the prosecutorial memo brought to us is kind of, it doesn't equal what is going on right now at the Congress. So we have to reconciliate the memo with the reconciliation bill. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I mean, what I understand is basically we're working in a context that's a little complicated, right? The Biden administration hasn't been able to move some of the stuff that you're mentioning around the bill, around all of that. And at the same time, we have this little tool that in some ways is going to impact people, as you were saying. I do think like part of why we wanted to bring Adelina in first is thinking about, we worked on cases together where, as she was saying, there were people who were in the past considered priority. One of the biggest changes in this memo is that those particular people are not, but that doesn't mean that we're going to stop, that there's stuff that not to fight, right? Like we're obviously still going to continue pushing on all of those fronts. Are there any last words before we move on to some of our more legal details?
I think that would help many of our community members some kind of relief. That we have been living almost 20 years on this criminalization period that have processed for deportation thousands and millions of people. Now is the time to work together and to do something different from there, to get a relief for our community as well, but also it's an opportunity to organize, Tanya.
Thank you, Adelina. So we're going to bring in now Julie Mao. Julie Mao is an attorney at Just Futures Law, and she has worked with organizers who represent lots of folks fighting their deportations. And as Adelina said, like we're still figuring out what the big picture stuff is moving, what's happening at the legislative level. And what we have right now is this memo that provides some little protections or some opportunities for organizing. But anyway, getting into the details. So Julie.
Thanks so much,
what
Tanya.
Are some of the main takeaways?
Yeah, thanks so much, Tanya. And just kudos. I want to celebrate all the hard work that Mi Gente and its members, like Ade, have done to really push for the most expansive and strongest memo possible in this really hard moment. I think that I've lawyer, been in the immigration movement, working alongside Mi Gente and the Not One More campaigns for a number of years now. And, I think there's some good things in the memo. There's some not so good things in the memo. But I think the key takeaway, like Ade said, is that there's lots of organizing opportunities in this memo to fight against deportation and to fight all cases of deportation, regardless of individuals' criminal or immigration history. So what I thought I'd do super quickly is kind of do a quick overview of the new DHS memo, some of the good things in the memo, some of the bad things, and kind of a recap on some of the opportunities. So some of the legal details, the memo is broken up into 3 major categories of individuals that they might consider as priorities for deportation, but then lists a number of aggravating as well as mitigating factors that could warrant, even if you're in that category, a grant of prosecutorial discretion. So the 3 main categories are quote unquote national security threats. This was in prior iterations of this memo. I think it's in reference to espionage, terrorism, those sort of blanket labels. The second category is what they term current public safety threats, individuals that have some quote serious criminal conduct that currently pose a threat to the community. And the third is border security, individuals who have recently entered and therefore may be considered priorities for removal. And then lastly, there is this provision on the second to last page around respecting civil liberties and granting prosecutorial discretion in the cases of retaliation. Okay, so what are the good things in the memo? I think one of the key takeaways, especially for Mi Gente Network folks, is that under the public safety threat category, there are no categorical bars based on criminal history. If you remember in the interim memo that was issued in January, there was references to people with aggravated felonies. In subsequent issuance of the memo, there were references to people with gang affiliation being labeled as priorities. None of that is there anymore. So there is no categorical bar based on certain types of criminal convictions or conduct to being eligible for a grant of prosecutorial discretion. The second good thing is that there's no reference to a removal order or past immigration history as an aggravating factor or a contributing factor for public safety threat. If people recall some of Obama's prior memos, I know it feels like a long time ago, there were a number of references to people with final orders, deportation orders being priorities. That is no longer there. And then the other thing that's quite helpful is that there's some mitigating factors that they explicitly list in the memo as potentially, even if somebody's criminal history might be considered serious, there might be these factors that are satisfied that would still warrant a grant of prosecutorial discretion, and they include length of stay in the U.S., rehabilitation, how old the conviction is, whether it's expunged, the hardship to the family of removal, public service, or being a witness, victim, or party to an ongoing legal proceeding, such as a civil rights proceeding, a criminal court proceeding, things like that. And there's also, lastly, an acknowledgement of retaliation and ICE and local police partners respecting civil rights. This is probably the first and only time I've seen a DHS memo name retaliation as something that ICE does and should not do. And even though we think it should be a lot stronger, this is the result of folks in this community pushing for that issue to be addressed. The bad things now are that there is this recent entry priority category for individuals who have entered the US after November 1st of 2020. Those individuals are still priorities. And unfortunately, there's no exception based on somebody seeking asylum or other legal claims. The second bad thing is that, unfortunately, the public safety category is kind of vague. Even though there's no bars based on criminal convictions, there's not much defining what is actually considered a serious criminal conduct. And so what likely may happen is that that will be determined at the hands of field offices to define what will be those types of crimes that would warrant a denial of prosecutorial discretion. So in summary, there's tons of ways that organizers can use this memo. Yes, there's some bad things in it, but because there's no criminal bars and there's an acknowledgement of mitigating factors, we can use those mitigating factors as tools of advocacy and organizing for individuals who may have previously been gang labeled by racist police, individuals who lived for a long time, like Ale was saying, 20, 10 years, might have a prior interaction with police that would have previously barred them from any sort of consideration of PD. We can fight for those individuals now far more strong than we were before. And lastly, I think we need a lot of organizing right now to keep these ICE field offices accountable and to push for the broadest implementation of this PD memo. I think that this memo will say what we want it to say if we put the organizing and advocacy work into it. And I'll hand it over back to you, Tanya.
Thank you, Julie. And I do think it is this, to me, it's definitely this place where like ICE officers are going to do what like they can do unless we organize and push back. And so anyway, that makes a lot of sense to me. So thank you. We're going to go to thinking a little bit about some of the ways in which it's the PD memo, those pieces that Julie was talking about and Adelina was talking about, that one, how we got there, and hearing from Fall Sok. He's an organizer at the Youth Justice Coalition. He has been working on really pushing back against particularly adding aggravated felonies or gang affiliations as an automatic priority for deportation. You were actually, Paul, you were in the meetings with Mayorkas, told your story, talked about how harmful it is. So anyway, want to get your take on, what does it mean that there isn't some of these bars as there were before? And also like just, what you think about the current public safety threat category, which still seems to be a problem. So anyway, welcome, Paul.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for making the space available to talk about this. It's critical that we really talk about folks that are coming out of prisons and jails and lockups, folks that are often viewed by society as being discardable, disposable, however you want to name it, right? This is an opportunity that really reaffirms that, when community comes together, we're able to do things, right? We're able to dignify folks and look at their humanity, look at them for who they are. And, this is just the power of what we can do as community, as impacted people, as people looking after each other and just showing love to one another, right? That we can get to a space like this. There's some good and some bad, as always, until we can get to a place where, enforcement is gone entirely and where folks can travel freely and find a better life or choose to migrate simply as moving any part of the world as they want. Until then, but really wanted to uplift the fact that there are no like straight up bars. I mean, that's real. I remember when I came out of prison, right? Like I went in when I was 17, came out in my mid 30s, finally got let out, and going into like immigration court or whatever. I remember they were like, no, there is no prosecutorial discretion for this guy. He's priority one. It's aggravated felony. Like that's it. End of conversation. They said, I don't even have it in writing, but I'm sure that's our department policy at the moment. So that means folks that are coming out that are caught up in that situation, like much like myself, like have no chance. It doesn't matter if you got children here. It doesn't matter if you're the last caretaker for an aging parent. It don't matter. It don't matter how you got pushed into the system. It don't matter any of those things when you get just labeled that way, right? And when it comes to gang labeling, a lot of young folks get labeled as being affiliated or members of whatever neighborhoods and things like that, just because simply where they lived, just because of their zip codes, just because of the other students that they walk to school with, they get named and labeled that way, right? And get caught up in that system. And for those of us that weren't born here, unfortunately, that's like a fast track to deportation. And in many cases, folks that get stuck on the gang database, unfortunately, get fast tracked without even getting any criminal charges, right? Like us, ICE will suddenly show up at your door and be like, hey, let's go. You're blah, 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 et cetera, time to take you. Right. So these are like the situations that we're working after. But it does remind me of the folks that are still inside, right? Like folks now come out, will have an opportunity, community will have an opportunity to get together to say, hey, we can, we can advocate for you. We actually have a hook. We actually have a way to access to say that you are not automatically bound to leave. Like you're not set for that, right? That gives folks hope. That gives folks something better than to just sit in a concrete box, a human warehouse anywhere in the US just because you're being flown around waiting for deportation, right? These are opportunities that are being brought up to us to be able to look after families and take care of folks, right? To be able to reunite people. But, the challenge is, for me, seeing it, it's like, it's vague. It's somewhat open-ended. So who's defining what, like, criminal record is going to pick somebody up, right? Like, that's where the challenge lies for me. So I think for us as community, we need to get back on the ground. We need to push. We need to push hard. And anybody that we know that's coming out of the system, out of a prison lockup or whatever the case may be, like we need to wrap around them. We need to show them love and be there to support them all the way through, right? We need to be able to hit these ICE officers and say, hey, man, we're like, let our people go. Check this out. This is the information you don't have about this person that you're not going to look for. Even the memo says it, like they got to investigate whatever. But when have we ever seen them go look for equities, for positive equities for people? It just doesn't happen. So this is definitely an opportunity, right, for us to bring that material and to bring it down and to call those officers, et cetera, and to bring folks out and give folks that opportunity, right? And be able to have that voice for folks and just be able to wrap around folks. Because the only reason I'm still here is because community came through. That's the only reason I'm here today. If it was not for community, I would have been long gone. I would have been on a plane sent to a country I've never even set foot in. Like, that's the reality of it. That's how this system works. And the last thing I want to say is folks have to remember, society prepared the crime. Folks that just happen to walk into that preparation, society decided to label them criminal. We have to remember that. Society prepares the crime, and folks just walk into those situations. That's what's been prepared for them, whether it's school push-outs, lack of funding in neighborhoods, lack of resources, whatever the case may be. Society prepared that to happen for them. So they got caught up in the system because society forced it upon them. It's not something that they chose.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. I definitely think that, obviously this is not the end of the criminal justice system or the criminal system at all. Like, we're talking about such a tiny, tiny piece, but that can definitely make an impact, as you said, in people's lives. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for your work and for your testimony.
Sure.
So we are gonna hear from three more folks that are gonna tell us a little bit more about the breadth of this PD memo. Again, still the good and the bad and the stuff that's hazy that if we don't get on it as organizers, is gonna be left up to ICE agents. But next, we're going to hear from Quique Baltazar. Quique Baltazar is an organizer at Migrant Justice, Justicia Migrante. And I'm going to do the question in English and then in Spanish. But Quique is someone who, as part of the ICE on ICE tactic, was part of a meeting with Secretary Mayorkas, described how he and 39 other members of Justicia Migrante were arrested by ICE, being leaders in the Leche con Dignidad campaign. They were fighting for fair conditions at lecheras. And anyway, the new memo talks about the importance of organizing, and that being a part of the things that they consider, right, as a positive factor in discretion, as well as figuring out which ICE agents are actually targeting people. So we're going to ask Quique about whether these protections are effective and how you feel about it, Quique. So en español, pues como resultado de la táctica de ICE on ICE, sabemos que fuiste parte de la reunión con el secretario Mayorkas. Y pues tú describiste cómo 39 miembros de Justicia Migrante fueron arrestados por ICE. Y bueno, este nuevo memorándum habla de que se tiene que ser un factor positivo, ¿no? El hecho de organizar. Entonces queríamos ver, pues, cuál es tu reacción, ¿no?, sobre lo que ha pasado y qué se debe asegurar para que estas protecciones verdaderamente funcionen para nuestra gente.
Sí, muchísimas gracias por el espacio. Creo que me siento tan contento de compartir un espacio con gente tan inspiradora, que hemos estado como ahí hablando, ¿verdad?, con el secretario Mayorkas y su equipo para avanzar las protecciones a nuestra comunidad, la protección a los derechos, a la no deportación.
So thank you so much. First of all, I just want to say thank you for having me here, and I feel so inspired to be here among such inspirational people. We've been working together, being in the meeting, right, directly with Secretary Mayorkas, and trying to fight for protections for our communities.
Sí, y nosotros nos sentimos muy contentos de haber puesto nuestra voz, la voz de la comunidad de trabajadores lecheros en Vermont, eh, compartiendo nuestro caso, porque acá en Vermont, lo que tú dijiste, fuimos alrededor de 40 miembros que fuimos perseguidos, arrestados y en muchos casos deportados por ahí. Y yo estuve dentro de esa lista, que afortunadamente pude parar mi deportación.
And we feel very happy to have been able to also share our experience as dairy workers who were first fighting in the lecheras, in the dairy factories. And there were about 40 of our members who were investigated, pursued, arrested, and many of whom were actually deported by ICE. And I was one of those arrested as well.
Y eso fue claramente una violación a la primera enmienda de la Constitución de los Estados Unidos, a la libertad de expresión, ¿verdad? Porque acá nos estábamos organizando y nos seguimos organizando por los derechos humanos, ¿verdad? La campaña Leche con Dignidad a la que mencionabas es luchar por condiciones justas en los lugares de trabajo.
That was a clear violation of our First Amendment, our rights of freedom of expression, right? Because we were organizing as part of the Milk with Dignity campaign for better conditions in our workplace.
Y sin duda hay que celebrar el paso importante, ¿verdad? Como limitar el alcance que tienen las agencias de inmigración para arrestar y deportar nuestra comunidad, pero sin embargo hay que exigir cumplimiento, ¿verdad? Como creo que esa es la clave. ¿Cómo hacemos cumplir eso que está en papel? Porque las cosas en papel pueden quedar ahí. Los agentes los van como a usar como quieren, ¿verdad? Entonces, debe de haber entrenamiento, creo que es una cosa importante para esos agentes, y cumplimiento.
Without a doubt, we need to celebrate that we have taken a step forward and that there are new protections in place. But the most important thing is the follow through. We need to actually see accountability. We need to see follow through, because something that's on paper doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen in real life. And we know that agents oftentimes don't respect what's on paper. So we need to see a significant amount of training, and we also need to see follow through and accountability.
Sí. Y con cumplimiento me refiero que debe de haber, ¿verdad?, consecuencias para estos agentes. No importa si es el director o es un agente o es un secretario solo de la agencia de ICE que está actuando para deportar una persona. No importa quién sea, como debe ser como despedido, como creo que ese va a ser el impacto más fuerte y que va a ayudar a crear un poco más de confianza en las personas de que esta administración está trabajando para proteger los derechos de la comunidad migrante.
And when I'm talking about follow through, I'm talking about real accountability, and I'm talking about for everyone. So whether that person is an ICE field office director, a secretary, an agent, it doesn't matter. They all need to be held accountable. And when I say accountable, I mean that if they're not following this, they need to be fired. That's going to be the thing that causes the greatest impact in these agencies. And that's going to be the actual testament to whether this administration is serious about putting in these protections for our communities that are organizing.
Sí. Y sí, que nuestra comunidad esté como enterada de los cambios que están pasando, por más mínimos que sean, y que puedan como denunciar, ¿verdad? Usar esta guía para empoderarse y poder denunciar estos abusos de poder, ¿verdad? Como para que realmente haya esas consecuencias hacia los agentes.
And I think it's also very important that our communities be informed of the changes that are happening, even the smallest ones, because we need to be able to denounce and expose when these agents don't fall in line and when they are committing abuses.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Kike, por todo tu trabajo. Thank you for all your work. Y felicidades. Congratulations in this win. So we're gonna go on to bring in a guest, Gianni Gustav. He's the legal assistant at Haitian Bridge Alliance. And Gianni, as you come in, we know that one of the most disappointing parts of the PD memo is the fact that the Biden administration is going to continue to target people who've recently arrived to the U.S. As particularly after November 2020 as a priority. And I know that y'all have worked very directly, not just with us, but really to push Secretary Mayorkas in letting him know how harmful this has been for our communities. So what's your take on what's happening? What's your reaction of the impact this will have on folks at the border?
Sure. Thank you for having me on your show. At HBA, we believe in the following. It's without question that this memo continues to place too much power over people's lives in the hands of ICE. ICE, without question, has an extensive history of human rights abuses, due process violation, and racial profiling. To look at that, you can look no further than the fact that currently, no Haitians are passing their credible fear interviews. So, like many others, a main issue that we take with this memo is the fact that the language is so broad that it prioritizes the deportation of anyone who crosses the southern border. So by definition, it also includes individuals seeking asylum, but cannot, due to Title 42, are prioritized for removal. The memo states that all people who were apprehended by DHS at the border or at a port of entry while attempting to enter the United States, or who were apprehended in the U.S. after entering November 1st, 2020, are a threat to border security and are therefore prioritized for removal. This particularly is harmful, given that this section does not explicitly addresses those entering to petition for asylum, which again is a lawful right protected under U.S. law. This, without doubt, impacts thousands of Haitians that would have otherwise qualified for CPS, which the Haitian Bridge Alliance has relentlessly fought for. It would, of course, also impact all migrants seeking asylum. We also saw the pictures of how they are being treated by CBP agents, and this memo merely reinforces the notion that they do not deserve comfort, which are basic human necessities. This won't be the first time Black immigrants remain targeted and unprotected. Unfortunately, we live in an immigration system with anti-racism embedded into it, and we'll always uplift our voices for these communities. Yes, we are thankful to some new protections, but all of our community is deserving of full protection. That's what we believe in at the Haitian Bridges Alliance. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you. And the last person we want to bring into this conversation is Maru Mora. Maru is joining us from Seattle. She's an organizer at La Resistencia. Yeah, I mean, is Maru around? Can we bring up Maru? Hi, Maru. Hi. And first of all, congratulations. For folks who don't know, Maru just beat ICE one more time in her long history of having fights with ICE and winning. ICE went after her very directly as an organizer against immigration enforcement and very basically said, like, she shows up at these protests, but she's undocumented, so why aren't we deporting her? But you won, so anyway, felicidades.
Gracias.
So no, like, as our last speaker and as like someone who's been fighting ICE for a really long time and winning in a lot of cases, no siempre, how do you see this memo? What should organizers be thinking about?
Well, I don't want to be repetitive of what everybody said, but it is important to realize that all the work that we've done for decades now is paying off, right? We, at least when Resistencia began joining the No One More campaign, we fought really hard to end that divisive narrative of the good immigrant versus the bad immigrant, which we've seen in past PD memos. And this latest one shows that, yes, we're starting to have some impact, like Kike said, at least on paper. And so there's some wins here. like it was mentioned, the fact that somebody can have a criminal record but won't automatically make them a priority for deportation. That's huge. The problem, though, is that it is very general on how local communities can escalate requests for prosecutorial discretion, and if their local field offices going rogue, or how field offices and their agents will be held accountable, really fall short of not only what we have demanded for years, but also way short on what we deserve, which is a process where people in deportation proceedings can fight back, have avenues of relief, which was mentioned by Ade, and most importantly, not being afraid of retaliation for taking a stand against immigration enforcement. So although it talks about some civil rights in the memo, like Julie said, we've never seen that before, it doesn't have that part of enforcement and accountability. But I think there's 2 points that I want to make here. One is how we're going to be pressuring ICE to actually use prosecutorial discretion, because the memo says you have it, use it, but it doesn't really make sure that they will use it. So when we have to expose ICE for this lack of prosecutorial discretion exercise. And the memo is very broad, and as before, ICE has circumvented past protocols, they could do it again. So we must keep organizing and keep this angle of organizing on how to make sure that ICE exercises prosecutorial discretion. So we need to build pressure on ICE to actually use it, expose them for not doing so, or for not doing correctly. Because I'm thinking of, there might be some cases that they say, well, we took a look at the case, but no, they don't meet the criteria. We have to find out, how does this person not meet the criteria? What exactly looks like? And the second point is the fact that the memo includes the criteria to apply discretion for people with criminal records, like it was mentioned before. It gives us that chance to ensure that ICE uses that criteria, right? All the points that were mentioned by Julie. And we have to create a public outrage when they still refuse to free people based on that very same criteria. And what is happening that we've seen again and again is that ICE uses this label of public safe threat, which is very racist and very biased, to stop people from being released or from detention, or just stop the deportation proceeding in the first place. So this is why our narrative against the deserving versus the undeserving comes, which is we must not shy away from working with people in deportation proceedings because they have a criminal record. On the contrary, let's build that change in the culture so we stop normalizing the criminalization and casting aside those that don't meet the label of the deserving immigrant. So I think that after hearing everybody, yes, it is not a perfect memo. We don't expect that a memo is going to fix everything. We need to keep fighting, and we have to fight for every single member in our community. And that means launching our anti-deportation campaigns whenever ICE decides to label someone exactly with that same current public safety threat language. Only the organizing is what's going to give us the results and the win that we deserve.
And so organizing got us here, and organizing will take us where we're going next, basically. Gracias, Maru. So just to finish off, so this hopefully gave you a better idea of what the PD memo does, what it doesn't do, what is going to be left up to ICE agents if we don't organize, and where organizers can use it to push both in the places where we're not recognized and where we want to have better categories and better accountability. So please, keep paying attention, not just to what's going on at the legislative level, but also what is happening at your local ICE office. And, some ideas that already came out of this conversation is figuring out who's not following the rules and firing them, as well as pushing on the, really like pushing on the categories and making sure that we're proving that our people, that our people have a right to be recognized as full human beings, including the right to be here in this country. So with that, we'll bring it to a close. Please look out for a resource that we're bringing out called El Pueblo Se Defiende Toolkit. This is a toolkit that's analyzing the prosecutorial discretion memo and how activists and organizers in our communities can use it to push back on ICE, particularly when they detain our communities, and how we can, if the memo doesn't talk about accountability, we'll make sure that our communities make ICE accountable and continue to push Biden to make him accountable, to making sure that our communities are able to live and be recognized as human beings. So with that, thank you to everyone who participated, and to folks who are doing the work every day. And so, gracias.